All right, today we're going to look at notes for geometric mean. The geometric mean between two numbers can be found with a proportion a over x equals x over b, where x is your geometric mean. So my first example, find the geometric mean between 5 and 45. When I look at this, I want to find the geometric mean, which I said is a proportion, so two fractions set equal, where my geometric mean is going to go in the denominator of 1 and the numerator of the other, and then the two numbers that I want to find the geometric mean between go in the leftover spots. Okay? To solve this, what we want to do is cross multiply. Okay? So I'm going to end up doing x times x equals 5 times 45. To get rid of the square, we square root both sides, and x equals 15. Nice, pretty numbers. Sometimes they're decimals, and that's okay. All right. And we have two places we use the geometric mean in geometry, and they're both using right triangles. Okay? My first one says the altitude of a right triangle is the geometric mean of the divided parts of the hypotenuse. So if I break that down, the altitude of a right triangle is the geometric mean. So when I set up my proportion, the altitude is the geometric mean. So that goes here and here. And what is it the geometric mean of? It's the geometric mean of the divided parts of the hypotenuse. So when I look at this triangle and I see its hypotenuse across from the main right angle, okay, this is my hypotenuse. Here is my altitude. Okay, so the divided parts are going to be the 8 and the 25. But just for kind of right now formula's sake, I'm just going to write part and part. So that's kind of like the formula that we use when we're working with an altitude and the hypotenuse. Okay, so if I want to actually solve this and find its altitude, I'm going to start making my proportion. The altitude, which I don't know, I can call that x, is the geometric mean between 8 and 25. So I'm going to cross multiply x times x equals 8 times 25. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to want to square root to cancel out the square on the left-hand side, which gives me just x equals, and then we round to 3 places for pre-AP, 2 places for regulars. So here I would get 14.142. Okay, right triangle altitude theorem. Let's look at the next. The next one is the right triangle leg theorem. And it says the leg of a right triangle is the geometric mean. So this time, the leg is the geometric mean, so it's the one that repeats. Okay? And it's the geometric mean of the hypotenuse and the adjacent part. So one of these is hypotenuse, and the other is a part of the hypotenuse. Okay? So here is the formula we would be using if we're dealing with a leg and a hypotenuse. Okay, so if I look at this picture that I've got, I can see that here is my hypotenuse. Let's say I want to find this leg on this side, okay, my up and down, my vertical leg, my shorter vertical leg. Okay, if I want to find this one, the leg is the geometric mean of the hypotenuse. Now my hypotenuse is the whole thing, the 8 plus the 25, so 33. And then the part, it says it's the adjacent part of the hypotenuse. So what that means is if I am looking at this leg, then the adjacent part of the hypotenuse is the one right next to that leg. So the adjacent part in this case is 8. Okay, so then what I want to do is cross multiply x times x and 33 times 8 so I've got x squared equals 264, so I square root to get just x because that will help that cancel out. And x equals, the square root of 264 is 16.248. Okay. Let's try symbols. Find the geometric mean between each pair of numbers. So I've got 6 and 9, and then 1/2 and 2. All right, so geometric mean is what I want to try to find. And the two numbers are 6 and 9. So all I need to do is cross multiply x times x and 9 times 6. Once I've done that, all I have to do is square root both sides. When I square root both sides, I get a value x equals, square root of 54 is 7.348. Okay. Looking at the next one, I want to find the geometric mean of 1/2 and 2. If you're a little kind of weird about putting fractions in a fraction, you could change the 1/2 to a 0.5 and 2. So when I cross multiply, I get x squared equals 1/2 times 2. Then I square root. And x has a value of 1. Okay. All right, let's practice our theorems. All right, so what if I look at this first example here, I need to find x, y, and z. If I start with x, x is an altitude. Okay, so then I'm just going to kind of remind myself I had the little formula that said the altitude was the geometric mean of the parts of the hypotenuse. Okay, so my altitude is the geometric mean of the parts of the hypotenuse. So my altitude x is the geometric mean between the parts of the hypotenuse, 2 and 5. Cross multiply x squared equals 10. Square root both sides. And x equals 3.162. Okay, then we want to find y. Y is a leg. So remember my leg formula says the leg is the geometric mean. Sorry about that handwriting, between the hypotenuse and the part closest to that leg on the hypotenuse. Okay, so when I look at this one, the second one, I've got the geometric mean. The leg, y, is the geometric mean between the hypotenuse, 7, and the part closest to that leg, 2. Cross multiply y squared equals 14 square root, and y equals 3.742. 3.742. All right, so then I have one more, z. Z is also a leg, so it's going to be the second formula over here. My leg is the geometric mean between the whole hypotenuse and the part of the hypotenuse closest to that leg, which in this case is 5. So when I cross multiply, z squared equals 35 square root, and z equals 5.916. All right, let's look at another example. All right, so in this one I need to find x and y. If I look at x, x is a leg, and my leg formula says that the leg is the geometric mean between the hypotenuse and the part closest to that leg. Okay, so if I look here at this leg, I need to know the whole hypotenuse and then the part closest to that leg. Unfortunately, I don't know the whole hypotenuse because I don't know y. What I need to do is I need to find y first. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to use my altitude, which is the geometric mean between the two parts that the hypotenuse is divided into. Okay, well, here's my altitude. My altitude is the square root of 3, so that's the geometric mean between the two parts, 1 and y. When you cross multiply, don't let square roots scare you. You could type it in your calculator, but if you square a square root, so you multiply a square root to itself, square roots just cancel out, so that's just 3. And then I have y times 1, so that's just y. So this piece here is 3. When I come back and I look at my other one, the leg is the geometric mean between the hypotenuse, which is going to be 3 plus 1, 4, and the part that's closest to that leg, 1. Cross multiply, x squared equals 4 square root, and x equals 2. Okay, let's look at the next example. Okay, on this one, I already have my formulas kind of scribbled out to the side for us. On this one, if I want to find x, it's a leg, so that's going to be this second formula. The x is going to be the geometric mean between the hypotenuse, which is the whole thing here, 6, and the part closest, which is 2. Cross multiply, x squared equals 12 square root, and x equals 3.464. Okay, and then let's look at y. Y is an altitude, so that's going to be this first formula. Y, the altitude, is the geometric mean between the two parts of my hypotenuse. One of them is 2, the other one, well, if the whole length is 6 and I've used 2, that leaves me with 4 for that one there. Okay, so then I cross multiply y times y, 2 times 4, square root, and y equals 2.828. Last but not least, let's find z. Z again is another leg, so it's going to be this second formula. The leg is the geometric mean between the hypotenuse, which is 6, and the part closest to that leg, which is 4. So z squared equals 24, square root, and z equals 4.899. Okay, next. All right, so when I look at this next one, I want to find the whole hypotenuse. That's what x is the whole entire hypotenuse. In order to find the hypotenuse, if I use this right here to find it, I need one of the legs and the part that's closest to it, which means I would need to know this piece here, but I don't know it, okay? So I'm going to use the altitude one instead, okay? So let's see, if I use the altitude, here's the altitude. The altitude is the geometric mean between the two parts. One of my parts is 8. I don't know my other part. So I'm just going to make up another variable for it. I'm going to go with y You could use a P for part. I probably wouldn't use X because there's already an X in the problem. I wouldn't use O because it looks like 0. I'm going to go with Y. When I cross multiply, I get 8Y equals 144. Okay, so then I just need to divide by 8. And I get that Y equals 18. But I'm not looking for Y. Remember, that means that this right here, now I know that it is 18. If I want to know how long the whole hypotenuse is, X is going to equal the 8 plus the 18. My hypotenuse is 26. Okay, let's look at our next example. All right, so when I look at this problem, it's a little bit more difficult as far as solving goes, for those of you in pre-AP who need to solve the problem. And I look at my information. I don't have any legs, I have an altitude, and I have parts. So I'm going to go with this formula on the left-hand side. I'm going to end up with my altitude is the geometric mean, square root of 21, square root of 21. And then my parts are x plus 4 and x. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to cross multiply. Remember, when you cross multiply here, you have to think of that as being in parentheses. So it's really x times x, which is x squared, and then x times a positive 4, which is positive 4x. And on my other side, square root of 21 times square root of 21 is just 21. Okay, so now we have to reach back into our Algebra 1 brains. And remember that to solve this quadratic equation, I have to set it equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 21 on both sides. When I do that, because there's not like terms, it's going to be x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. At this point, I'm going to need to factor it. So to factor it, if you need a reminder on factoring, I do have a video available on factoring. Okay. But I need the multiples of negative 21. So that's going to be 1 times 21, 7 times 3, and that's going to be all the factors of 21 I have. Okay? One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative in order to get a negative 21. I want to end up with a positive 4 when I add them together. So the ones that are 4 apart are my 7 and 3. If I want a positive 4, I'm going to make a positive 7 and a negative 3. When I write my factors, I'm going to do my parentheses, equals 0, and I'll end up with an x and a positive 7 and a negative 3. Okay, so that's factoring. Now I need to still find x. If both of those things multiplied together make 0, that means one or both of them make 0. So when I look, either x plus 7 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. If I solve these problems by subtracting 7 on both sides, I get x equals a negative 7, and then adding 3 on both sides, I get x equals a positive 3. Okay, so when I look at my answer, if I think back to the idea that this right here is a value of x, it's a distance. Distances cannot be negative, which means my answer cannot be a negative 7. Okay, that's not okay. My answer has to be this positive 3. Okay? All right, let's look at the last problem. The last problem is a little bit different from this one where we got an answer of x equals 3. All right, when I look at this last one, what I notice is I see that I know my leg, one of my legs is 6, and then I know my 2 parts of the hypotenuse that's been divided by the altitude. Okay, so since I don't know what the actual altitude is, I don't want to use the altitude formula. I'm going to use the one with the legs. So hypotenuse over leg equals leg over part. when I set this up, my geometric mean is the leg, so that's the 6. And then it's going to be the whole hypotenuse, which in this case, my whole hypotenuse is 2x plus 5. And then the part that's closest to that leg, so that's going to be the 2x. All right, so now in order to solve this for x, if you're in regulars, you can stop there. We're just setting up the proportion. But for pre-AP, to solve this for x, we're going to need to cross multiply. And when I cross multiply, I need to remember that that's really in parentheses. So it's really 2x times 2x plus 5 equals, on the other side, 6 times 6, 36. Okay? All right, so then I distribute, and I get 4x squared plus 10x, because 2x times 5 equals 36. Okay, so what I want to do with that is I need to get it set equal to 0 so that I can factor it and solve, just like I did on the last one. I'm going to subtract the 36 on both sides. 36 doesn't combine with either the 4x squared or the 10x, so when I rewrite it out, I'm going to have 4x squared plus 10x minus 36 equals 0. Okay? Now this one works a little bit differently because last time we just said, what are my factors of the 36? That's all I was concerned with, was this negative 36. But since I don't have a leading coefficient of 1, I have a 4, I have to do this a little bit differently. I have to take that 4 and the negative 36, and I'm going to multiply them together, which gives me an answer of negative 144. So that's what I need to find factors of that make negative 144. So as I go through, I'm going to be looking for the one that gives me my positive 10x, and since I need a negative 144, I know I'm going to end up subtracting. So once I see two numbers that when I subtract them, I get a 10, that's when I'm going to stop. Okay, so I'm going to go through and let's see, 1 times 144, 2 times 72, 3 times 48, 4 times 36, 6 times 24, 8 times 18. Oh, look, 8 and 18, they're 10 apart. Okay, so now I need to figure out which one needs to be positive and which needs to be negative, so I get a positive 10. So I know if I take the 8 away from the 18, then I'm going to get my positive 10x. Okay, and again, if you need review factoring, please go watch the video that I made that reviews factoring. Next thing I'm going to do, a little different from before, is I'm going to uncombine my 10x into my negative 8x plus my 18x. So if I combine those together, it gets me back up to that 10x. My other two terms just drop straight down, so my 4x squared comes down, and my negative 36 comes down. And then we're going to factor by grouping. Okay, so to factor by grouping, I'm going to look at the first two terms and see what can I divide both of those numbers by. So 4 and 8 can both be divided by 4. So I know I can take out a 4. And then x squared and x both have x's in them, so I can also take out an x. All right? So then I need to see what is left after I do that. When I divide 4x squared by 4x, all I'm left with is an x. So that 4x squared times x gives me my 4x squared. Then to get my negative 8x, I'm going to need to do 4x times negative 2 will give me my negative 8x. Okay, so if you think about it, what we're trying to do is to figure out, if I were working backwards, if I distributed that 4x in, would I get what's above it? So 4x times x does give me 4x squared. 4x times a negative 2 does give me my negative 8x. Okay? All right, so then I group my second two factors together, and I want to figure out what do I need to take out of them so that I'm left with x minus 2. Okay, well, my first term has an 18 in it. Okay, so I need to get rid of the 18. I want just the x. So I know I'm going to need to divide it by an 18. And then I need to know, is it positive or negative? Well, since 18x is already positive, I don't want to take out a negative because that would change the sign. Okay, so I'm going to take out a positive 18. And an 18 over 18, that just gives me, that cancels out and leaves me with just x. So that 18 times x would give me my 18x. Okay, and then if I take an 18 out of the negative 36, that's going to leave me with a negative 2. So that if I multiplied 18 times a negative 2, I'd get my negative 36. Okay? All right, so now what I'm going to do, all right, so now I can see my two factors, and I'm actually going to come up over here, so I have a little more room to work, and I'm going to write those two factors. So I can see one is already in parentheses for me, ready to go, the x minus 2. And then the other one is my 4x plus 18. It's the stuff I took out. So again, over here, my 4x plus 18, that's where I got my second term from. And again, those equal, if I can squeeze them in here, those equal 0. Now, if two things multiplied together equal 0, that means one or both of them equal 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that means either x minus 2 equals 0, and or 4x plus 18 equals 0. So when I solve each side, this one, the left-hand side is really simple because we just have to add 2, and I get that x equals 2. And then on my other side, when I go to solve that one, first thing I need to do is subtract my 18. And that gives me 4x equals a negative 18. So I forgot my x. Divide both sides by 4. And that gives me x equals a negative 4.5. If I look at my two answers, x equals 2 and x equals negative 4.5, when I look back at my original problem, look where I had an x, right here, okay? If I put a 2 in there, that's going to make the length from P to S, it's going to make that length 4, which is great, okay? If I put a negative 4.5 in there times 2, that gives me a length of negative 9. Unfortunately, I can have a length of negative 9. So what that means is this cannot be my correct answer. I can't have a negative. My answer has to be x equals 2 for my final answer. All right, thanks for watching the notes over geometric mean. If you have any questions, feel free to drop by my room and ask me questions anytime. Okay? This concludes these notes.